The bell above the door of Jet's 24-hour diner didn't just chime, it gasped. It was 6:14 p.m. Outside, the Bucharest-style rain was turning the city into a blurred watercolor of neon blues and oil-slick blacks. Kace Vaduva sat in the corner booth, the shadows clinging to his charcoal overcoat like they were afraid to let go. He didn't look like a mobster. He looked like an architect of grief. His slate-gray eyes were fixed on the door, unblinking, tracking the rhythmic swipe of the windshield wipers on the street outside. Across from him, Togi Ben-Koli was the polar opposite. Broad-shouldered and radiating a heat that seemed to dry the air around him, Toby leaned back, his Rolex catching the flickering overhead light. He was grinning, his gap-toothed smile wide and disarming. "Kace, my brother, you are vibrating," Toby said, his voice a rich, low rumble. "The shipments is in the harbor. The port authority has been greased. Relax." Kace didn't move. His hand, adorned with a heavy silver signet ring, rested flat on the laminate table. "Stillness is not vibration, Toby. It's preparation." "It's creepy," a new voice interrupted. Sloane Jett slid a ceramic mug of black coffee onto the table. Her gold Sloane nameplate necklace danced against her collarbone. She didn't look at Kace with fear. She looked at him like he was a stray cat that refused to eat. Kace's eyes shifted, just a fraction, to hers. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Sloane said, popping a hip. Her Fulani braids were pulled into a sleek, efficient tail. She gestured to his plate. "You've been staring at that rye toast for 20 minutes like it's a bomb. It's not. It's just bread. Eat it or let me clear it. I've got a floor to mop." Toby barked a laugh, the sound echoing off the linoleum. "She's got your number, Kace. The Iron King met his match in a sourdough slice." Kace looked back at Sloane. Most people looked away within 3 seconds of meeting his gaze. She didn't. She stared back, her almond-shaped eyes observant, skeptical, and entirely unimpressed by the $4,000 overcoat or the scar through his eyebrow. "I am busy," Kace said, his voice a cold blade. "You're brooding," Sloane corrected. "There's a difference. Brooding is for teenagers and bad poets. Busy people eat their breakfast." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "If you're worried about the guys in the black sedan across the street, they left 5 minutes ago. They realized you weren't doing anything interesting." The stillness in the room shifted. Kace's hand gripped the signet ring. Toby's smile didn't vanish, but it tightened. "You saw them?" Kace asked. "Hard to miss," Sloane shrugged, turning to walk away. "They park like amateurs. They're blocking the fire hydrant. Now eat your toast, Iron Man. You look like you're about to faint." Kace watched her walk away, her movements graceful and practiced. For the first time in a decade, the iron in his chest felt a strange, uncomfortable warmth. "Toby," Kace whispered. "Yeah?" "Find out everything about her. Not as a target." Kace finally took a bite of the toast. "As a governor." For the next 2 weeks, the 3 a.m. slot at Jet's diner became a sacred appointment. Kace Vaduva didn't arrive with the usual thunder of a mob boss. There were no screeching tires or hulking bodyguards flanking the entrance. Instead, he appeared like a glitch in the dark. One moment, the sidewalk was empty, and the next, a tall, lean figure in a charcoal overcoat was pushing through the glass door. He always took the corner booth, he always ordered rye toast and black coffee, and he always watched Sloane. "You're staring again," Sloane said on the 5th night, sliding a fresh carafe of coffee onto the table. She was wearing an oversized denim jacket over her uniform, her gold Sloane nameplate necklace gleaming under the fluorescent hum. "Is there a bug on my face, or am I just that much more interesting than your preparations?" Kace leaned back, his slate-gray eyes tracking the movement of her gold nose stud. "You're an anomaly, Sloane Jett. Most people in this city are either trying to hide from me or sell me something. You're doing neither." Sloane pulled a stray thread from her Fulani braids, her expression skeptical. "Maybe I just don't see what the big deal is. You sit there in your expensive tech wear looking like a high-end shadow, but you eat like a man who's forgotten what flavor is. It's pathetic, really." Kace felt a rare, genuine tug at the corner of his mouth. Flavor is a distraction. I value efficiency. Efficiency is for machines, she countered, leaning her elbows on the table, invading his carefully maintained personal space. You grew up in Romania, right? Toby mentioned it. Don't tell me you didn't have a grandmother who made something that made your heart stop, something that wasn't efficient. Case's gaze drifted to the jagged scar in his eyebrow. For a second, the iron mask slipped. My grandmother made papanasi, fried dough, smetana, and blueberry jam. It tasted like safety. His voice dropped an octave. I haven't had it in 22 years. 22 years without safety? Sloane whispered, her tell-it-like-it-is energy softening into something dangerous. Empathy. No wonder you look like you're made of granite. She reached out, a bold, impulsive move, and tapped his silver signet ring with her fingernail. The streets might belong to the Iron King, Kace, but in here, between these four walls, you're just a guy who needs a better diet and a reason to smile. Kace didn't pull his hand away. The stillness he usually cultivated felt different tonight. It wasn't the silence of a predator, it was the quiet of a man realizing he was no longer alone in the dark. The shift ended at 3:45 a.m. The rain had slowed to a miserable, freezing mist. Sloane stepped out of the back exit of the diner into the narrow alleyway, reaching into her pocket for a lighter. She needed the nicotine to shake off the intensity of Case's slate-gray eyes. She saw the black sedan before she heard it. It was idling at the mouth of the alley, headlights off. A moment later, Kace stepped out of the front entrance of the diner. He moved with that swimmer's build grace, his overcoat flared behind him. He was 10 feet from his car when the sedan's doors flew open. "Kace, get down!" Sloane's voice tore through the silence. Pop, pop, pop. The rhythmic spit of suppressed gunfire shattered the quiet. Kace spun, his fast, not heavy muscles coiling as he dove behind a concrete pillar. But he wasn't fast enough. A bullet grazed his shoulder, tearing through the charcoal cashmere and painting the fabric a sudden, wet crimson. Radu's men, Kace hissed, his unblinking eyes scanning for a tactical opening. He reached for the weapon tucked into his waistband, but his left arm went limp, the shock of the hit deadening his nerves. The hitmen stepped out, 3 men in heavy leather jackets, moving with the brutal confidence of the old guard. Sloane didn't think. She didn't have a gun, but she had years of sturdy, athletic labor. She grabbed a heavy, industrial-sized steel grease bin from the diner's loading dock. With a grunt of practiced, efficient effort, she kicked the caster locks and sent the 300-pound bin hurtling down the sloped alley. It slammed into the lead hitman's legs with the sound of snapping bone. "Over here!" Sloane screamed, waving Kace toward the heavy steel door of the walk-in freezer. Kace stumbled, his face pale but his jaw set in an iron line. He dove into the alley just as a second volley of bullets chewed up the brickwork where his head had been. Sloane grabbed the collar of his coat, her gold nameplate necklace swinging wildly, and hauled him inside the diner's back door. She slammed the heavy deadbolt home and shoved him toward the walk-in freezer. "In! Now!" Inside the freezer, surrounded by hanging meats and crates of produce, the air was a biting -10 degrees. Kace slumped against the wall, his blood steaming in the cold. Sloane was already ripping her apron into strips, her hands steady despite the adrenaline. "You're insane," Kace rasped, watching her work. "You should have run." Sloane looked him dead in the eye, her gold nose stud catching the dim light of the freezer bulb. "I told you, Kace, I've got a defect. I can't walk past someone in pain." She tightened the makeshift bandage, her heart governing his iron in the freezing dark. Outside, the predatory rumble of Toby Ben Coley's convoy finally began to shake the building. "Toby is here," Kace whispered. "Good," Sloane snapped, her skeptical, observant gaze returning, "because you're bleeding on my clean floor and we're going to have words about your choice in enemies." The transition from the grease-slicked tiles of Jet's diner to the 52nd floor penthouse of the Vaduva Tower was like stepping from a riot into a sensory deprivation tank. Kace didn't talk as the private elevator hummed upward. His face was a mask of stillness, though the way his hand gripped the silver signet ring told a different story. Beside him, Toby Bencole stood like a silent monolith, his luxury watch catching the sterile LED light of the lift. Sloane, still wearing her blood-streaked denim jacket and gold nameplate necklace, simply stared at her reflection in the polished obsidian walls. When the door slid open, Sloane didn't gasp. She whistled. "Wow," she said, her voice echoing off the floor-to-ceiling glass. "I've seen more personality in a hospital waiting room." Kace stepped out, his heavy boots silent on the dark slate floors. "It is functional. It is secure. It is home." "It's a cave with a view, Kace," Sloane countered, walking toward the center of the living area. The furniture was all sharp angles, charcoal velvet sofas that looked like they'd punish you for sitting on them, a marble coffee table heavy enough to anchor a ship, and not a single photograph, rug, or stray bit of life in sight. Where do you actually live? Or do you just stand in the corner and recharge like a vacuum cleaner? Toby let out a short, sharp bark of a laugh. "I told you, Kace. The woman sees right through the iron." "Toby," Case's voice was a low warning, "check the perimeter. Triple the guard at the lobby. If Radu's men so much as breathe toward this building, I want to know." Toby nodded, his controlled power evident in the way he moved toward the security suite. "Consider it done. Sloane, there's a kitchen behind the black marble wall. It has everything except, apparently, soul." Once they were alone, the silence of the penthouse felt heavy. Kace walked to the window, looking out over the city. The rain had turned into a fine mist, obscuring the streets below. He looked like a king, but a king of a very cold, very empty mountain. "You can't go back to the diner, Sloane," he said, his back to her. "Radu knows your face. He knows you saved me. In his world, that makes you a combatant. In mine, it makes you a target." Sloane sat on the edge of the charcoal sofa, her athletic frame looking small against the vastness of the room. She started unlacing her pristine sneakers. "So what, I'm a prisoner in a designer cage now?" Kace turned. The slate-gray eyes softened just a fraction. "You are under my protection. There is a difference." "Is there?" Sloane stood up, padding across the slate floor in her socks. She stopped inches from him, her observant, skeptical gaze meeting his unblinking one. "Protection is a choice, Kace. If I stay here, it's not because I'm afraid of Radu. It's because I don't think you should be alone in this big, gray box." She looked around the room and sighed. "But if I'm staying, we're making some changes. First, we're getting some color in here. I have 3 boxes of vintage streetwear and some old vinyl in my trunk. Toby's gonna go get them." Kace blinked. It was the most expression he'd shown all night. "You want to bring boxes into the Vaduva residence?" "I want to bring life into a tomb," she corrected. She reached out and adjusted the collar of his charcoal overcoat, her fingers grazing the jagged scar at his eyebrow. "You rule the streets with iron, Kace, but you've forgotten how to live on them. If I'm the governor of this heart you're so worried about, then the first law is this: no more brooding in the dark." Kace looked down at her, at the gold nose stud, the sharp braids, and the fire in her eyes. For the first time in 22 years, the iron didn't feel like armor. It felt like a weight. "The second law?" Kace rasped. Sloane smiled, and for a second, the monochromatic room seemed to brighten. "We're finding someone who knows how to make papanasi. Efficiency is officially canceled." The following afternoon, the penthouse didn't smell like expensive rain and cold slate. It smelled like coconut jollof rice and bleached denim. Toby Bencole stood in the center of Case's minimalist kitchen, his high-end street aesthetic replaced by a silk booba shirt pushed up to his elbows. He was laughing, his gap-toothed smile directed at Sloane, who was currently organizing a stack of vintage vinyl records on Case's obsidian breakfast bar. "I'm telling you, Sloane," Toby roared, stirring a pot with practiced, rhythmic grace. "Kace thinks a negotiation is just staring at the man until his soul withers, but the real world runs on hunger and respect." Kace stepped into the room, his charcoal overcoat draped over his shoulders like a cape. His slate-gray eyes flicked from the bubbling pot to the vibrant, vintage streetwear cushions Sloane had already scattered across his velvet sofa. The iron was being invaded by color. Toby. Kace's voice was a low, disciplined vibration. The Yoruba syndicate is downstairs. They didn't come for lunch. They came for the harbor codes. Toby's jovial energy didn't vanish, but it shifted into controlled power. He tapped his watch. They are early. They want to see if the Iron King is as distracted by his new guest as the rumors say. Kace looked at Sloane. Stay in the bedroom. This is not the diner. These men do not value tell it like it is energy. Sloane didn't move. She adjusted her gold nameplate necklace and leaned against the marble counter. You're going into a room with 6 guys who think you're soft because you saved a waitress. If I hide, they're right. If I walk in there and pour the tea, I'm not a distraction. I'm a statement. Toby barked a laugh, looking at Kace with a disarming spark in his eyes. She's right, brother. In my culture, the woman at the table is the one who sees the lie before the truth is even spoken. Let the governor work. Kace hesitated, the jagged scar in his eyebrow twitching. Then he gave a single, imperceptible nod. If they breathe wrong, Toby ends them. Do not speak unless I look at you. The boardroom was a glass box suspended over the city. 5 men sat at the table, led by Segun, a mountain of a man in a tailored dashiki who looked like he could snap Kace's swimmer's build frame with one hand. The air was thick with expensive tobacco and unspoken threats. The pot is closed to your Romanian steel, Kace, Segun said, his voice a deep, resonant cello. Radu says you are compromised. He says the iron has rusted. Kace sat at the head of the table, unblinking, his silver signet ring tapping a slow, hypnotic rhythm on the wood. He didn't answer. He let the silence stretch until the air felt like it was about to shatter. Sloane walked in. She wasn't wearing a uniform. She wore an oversized designer bomber jacket, heavy hoop earrings, and her pristine sneakers. She carried a tray of small, steaming glasses of hibiscus tea. She moved with that efficient grace, sliding a glass in front of Segun. She didn't look down, she looked him dead in the eye, her almond-shaped gaze observant and entirely unimpressed. You're Segun, right? Toby says you're the best strategist in the Southern Hemisphere, but you're sitting here quoting Radu, a man who just lost 3 hitmen to a grease bin and a waitress. The air went absolute zero. Toby leaned against the doorframe, his hand near his waistband, his smile gone. Kace's stillness reached a terrifying peak. Segun stared at her. Then he looked at the tea. A grease bin? Kace isn't rusted, Sloane said, leaning over the table, her gold nose stud catching the light. He's just upgraded his security. If you want the harbor codes, you talk to the man who survived the ambush, not the coward who sent it. She turned and walked out, her urban vintage energy leaving a trail of fire in the cold room. Segun watched her go, then looked at Kace. A slow, respectful grin spread across the giant's face. She is the heart of the operation, I assume. Kace finally stopped tapping the ring. She is the government, he rasped, and the government says the deal is 50-50, or the harbor stays closed. Segun picked up the tea and drank. 50-50 it is. I like her tell it like it is energy, Kace. It's better than your staring. Outside the room, Sloane leaned against the wall, her heart hammering against her ribs. Kace stepped out a moment later, his monochromatic techwear silhouetted against the glass. He didn't scold her. He simply reached out and tucked a stray braid behind her ear. You broke the rule, he whispered. You spoke. The tea was getting cold, she whispered back, and I don't work for free. Kace looked at her, and for the first time his slate gray eyes weren't tracking exits. They were home. The city below was a graveyard of lights muffled by a thick rolling fog that swallowed the base of the Veduva Tower. Inside the penthouse, the only sound was the low, rhythmic crackle of a digital fireplace and the soft hiss of a needle finding the groove on one of Sloane's vintage soul records. Kace stood by the glass, his charcoal turtleneck making him look like a shadow cast against the night. He wasn't wearing his overcoat. Without it, his swimmer's build was evident, lean, corded muscle that spoke of a life spent in motion, even when he appeared still. Sloane sat on the edge of the marble kitchen island, swinging her legs. She'd swapped her denim jacket for one of Kace's spare black hoodies. It swallowed her frame. making her look small but somehow more in control of the space than he was. "The tea was a gamble," Kace said, his voice barely a vibration in the air. Segun could have had Toby executed for that disrespect. "But he didn't," Sloane countered, her observant, skeptical gaze fixed on his back. "Because men like that are bored, Kace. They're tired of the iron. They're tired of the posturing. They wanted to see if there was a pulse behind the suit." Kace turned slowly. The light from the digital fire caught the jagged scar in his eyebrow, casting a long shadow across his cheek. "There hasn't been a pulse in a long time, Sloane. In Romania, my father taught me that a heart is just a target. He was the iron before me. He ruled the docks in Constanza with a fist that never opened." Sloane hopped off the counter, her pristine sneakers silent on the slate floor. She walked toward him, stopping just outside his reach. "And what happened to him?" "His own brother," Kace rasped, his slate-gray eyes clouding. "My uncle wanted the territory. He didn't use a gun. He used my father's heart against him. He kidnapped my mother, told my father to come alone to the shipyard. My father went. He traded his life for hers." Case's hand tightened on the silver signet ring until his knuckles turned white. "My uncle took the docks anyway, and then he killed her too, just to be efficient." The silence that followed was suffocating. Sloane didn't offer a platitude. She didn't say she was sorry. She simply stepped into his space, her gold nameplate necklace catching the amber glow of the room. "So you decided to be a machine? No heart, no target, just iron." "It worked," Kace said, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. "I built this. I allied with Toby. I am untouchable." "You're a ghost, Kace," Sloane corrected. She reached up, her hands steady as she traced the line of the scar through his eyebrow. It was the first time she had touched him without the chaos of an ambush. Her fingers were warm. His skin was like ice. "You think you're protecting yourself, but you're just burying yourself alive. The iron isn't your strength. It's your coffin." Kace didn't pull away. He leaned into her touch, a microscopic movement that felt like a mountain crumbling. The stillness that defined him finally broke. He looked down at her, at the almond-shaped eyes that saw through every lie he'd ever told himself. "Radu is going to come for you," Kace whispered, his breath hitching. "He's going to try to do to me what my uncle did to my father. He's going to try to use you to break me." "Let him try," Sloane said, her tell-it-like-it-is energy returning with a fierce protective edge. "He's fighting a man who thinks he has nothing to lose. But he's about to meet a man who has a reason to win. There's a difference, Iron Man." Kace grabbed her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. For the first time in 22 years, he didn't look at the exits. He looked at her. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, the raw vulnerability of a boy in a Constanza shipyard bleeding through the boss's mask. "I don't know how to govern this." "You don't have to," Sloane smiled, pulling him closer until his forehead rested against hers. "That's what the governor is for." In the distance, a phone chimed, the pressure cooker signal. Toby's voice came through the intercom, tight and urgent. "Kace, the harbor isn't the problem anymore. Radu just moved on Sloane's old neighborhood. He's looking for leverage." The iron didn't return to Case's face. Something worse did. A cold, focused fire. He looked at Sloane, his slate-gray eyes turning into flint. "Toby," Kace said into the air, "get the convoy. We're not protecting anymore. We're governing." The rain in Sloane's old neighborhood didn't smell like expensive slate. It smelled of wet asphalt, cheap tobacco, and the ozone of a coming storm. A line of 3 black armored SUVs tore through the narrow streets, their engines a low, predatory rumble. Inside the lead vehicle, the industrial minimalist aesthetic was replaced by tactical readiness. Kace sat in the back, his charcoal overcoat draped over a ballistic vest. Beside him, Toby Bencole was checking the slide on a customized sidearm, his high-end street jewelry muffled by black tactical gloves. Sloane sat between them, her urban vintage oversized bomber jacket zipped to her chin. Her face was pale, her almond-shaped eyes fixed on the window. They were passing the diner. It was dark, the closed sign swinging mournfully in the wind. "Radu doesn't want the harbor, Kace," Toby said, his voice a controlled power vibration. "He wants to humiliate you. He's holding your old manager Marcus in the basement of the abandoned textile mill. He thinks Marcus is your heart because you used to protect that diner." Kace didn't blink. He watched the reflection of the streetlights in his silver signet ring. "He's wrong. Marcus isn't my heart. He's a witness. Radu is using an old map to fight a new war." "He has my sister, Kace," Sloane whispered, her voice cracking for the first time. "He took Maya from her apartment an hour ago. Toby's scouts saw the black sedan." The SUV swerved, tires screaming against the slick pavement as they skidded to a halt in front of the rusted iron gates of the mill. Kace turned to Sloane. The stillness in his slate-gray eyes was absolute. But it wasn't the coldness of a machine anymore. It was the focus of a man protecting his world. "Toby," Kace rasped, "take the perimeter. If a mouse breathes without a Romanian accent, end it." "With pleasure, brother," Toby said, sliding out of the car with surprising quietness for a man of his bulk. Kace grabbed Sloane's hand. "Stay in the car. The doors are reinforced. The glass is bulletproof." "No!" Sloane snapped, her tell-it-like-it-is energy returning with a vengeance. She gripped his hand back, her gold nameplate necklace catching the strobing light of the street lamps. "You told me I'm the governor, Kace. A governor doesn't hide in the basement while the city burns. Maya is in there. I'm going." Kace looked at her, at the gold nose stud and the fierce, protective grace. He realized he couldn't stop her. To try would be to treat her like a target, and she was the only one who had ever made him feel like a man. "Keep your head down," Kace commanded, his voice a low, lethal promise, "and stay behind the iron." They moved into the mill, a cavern of rotting timber and rusted machinery. In the center, under a single flickering floodlight, stood Radu. He was old guard, heavy-set, wearing a flashy leather jacket and a sneer that looked like a permanent scar. He held a jagged blade to the throat of a terrified young woman with Fulani braids, just like Sloane's. "Vaduva!" Radu screamed, his voice echoing off the corrugated steel. "You brought the girl? Good! Drop the gun. Give me the harbor codes, and maybe I don't bleed your little heart dry right here." Kace stepped into the light. He didn't drop his weapon. He didn't even raise it. He just stood there, his swimmer's build silhouetted against the dark, his slate-gray eyes fixed on Radu. "You made a mistake, Radu," Kace said, his voice absolute zero. "You thought the iron was a shell I wore to hide my weakness. You thought if you cracked it, you'd find something soft." Kace took a step forward, the jagged scar in his eyebrow twitching. "The iron wasn't my shell. It was my cage, and you just let the monster out." From the shadows, a disarming, gap-toothed smile flashed. Toby's voice rang out from the rafters. "Checkmate, you old dog." The floodlight exploded. The darkness returned. And in the silence before the muzzle flashes, Sloane Jett didn't scream. She lunged. The darkness in the textile mill was thick, tasting of rust and old oil. When the floodlight exploded, the world didn't just go black. It became a sensory battlefield where only the iron survived. Kace moved like a high-end shadow. He didn't run, he flowed. His swimmer's build allowed him to navigate the rusted loom machinery with a lethal, silent efficiency. He wasn't looking for a fight. He was hunting a resolution. "Radu," Kace's voice bounced off the corrugated steel walls, impossible to pin down. "You're fighting a war with 1990s tactics. You think holding a knife to a girl's throat gives you leverage? It just gives me a stationary target." Above them, in the rafters, Toby Bencole was the pressure cooker finally boiling over. He moved with surprising quietness for his size, his black tactical gear blending into the soot-stained timber. He tapped his luxury watch, not to check the time, but to trigger the signal. Whir, clack. The mill's ancient freight elevator groaned to life. It was empty, but the sound drew the ires of Radu's 3 remaining enforcers. They turned their weapons toward the moving lift, their old guard instincts failing them. "Now!" Toby roared, his voice a controlled power blast. Sloane didn't wait for Kace's permission. She had discarded her oversized denim jacket, revealing a sleek, dark athletic top that mirrored Kace's monochromatic tech wear. She moved with practiced, efficient grace, sliding under a rusted workbench as a volley of gunfire chewed up the wood above her. She wasn't armed with a gun. She was armed with observant, skeptical intelligence. Sloane reached into the pocket of her cargo pants and pulled out a high-intensity magnesium flare, a gift from Toby's Nigerian strategist's stash. She didn't throw it at the gunman. She threw it into the industrial dust collection bin directly behind Radu. The explosion wasn't lethal, but the blinding white light turned the dust into a shimmering, opaque curtain. "Maya, drop!" Sloane screamed. Her sister, sensing the tell-it-like-it-is authority in Sloane's voice, collapsed to the floor. Radu, blinded and coughing, swung his blade wildly in the white haze. Kace appeared from the mist like a vengeful ghost. He didn't use his firearm. He used the iron. His hand, weighted with the silver signet ring, connected with Radu's jaw in a short, disciplined arc. The sound was like a hammer hitting a stone. Radu didn't just fall. He folded. "Toby, east exit," Kace commanded, his slate-gray eyes already tracking the next threat. Toby dropped from the rafters, landing with the weight of a mountain. He caught one of the fleeing enforcers by the throat. His gap-toothed smile was gone, replaced by the grim reality of controlled power. He didn't need to fire a shot. The sight of him was enough for the others to drop their weapons into the slush. Sloane was on the ground, shielding Maya with her own body. Her gold nameplate necklace was tangled in her braids, and her pristine sneakers were ruined by oil and soot. But she looked up at Kace with a fierce, triumphant light in her almond eyes. Kace stood over the unconscious Radu, his chest heaving under his charcoal turtleneck. He looked down at his hand, the signet ring stained with crimson. For the first time, he didn't feel the stillness. He felt the pulse. He walked over to Sloane and knelt in the dirt, ignoring the ruined fabric of his tailored trousers. He didn't look at Maya. He looked at the woman who had just governed a street war with a flare and a scream. "You're bleeding," Kace rasped, reaching out to touch a small cut on her cheek. "It's just a scratch, Iron Man," Sloane whispered, her observant gaze softening as she leaned into his palm. "I told you, I don't walk past people in pain, especially not my own." Toby stepped into the light, his luxury watch glowing in the dark. "The perimeter is clear, brother. Radu is done. The streets are quiet." Kace looked around the decaying mill. The industrial, minimalist world he had built was gone. In its place was something messy, loud, and vibrantly alive. He stood up, offering a hand to Sloane and another to Maya. "Let's go home," Kace said. "To the gray box?" Sloane teased, though her voice was thick with relief. Kace looked at her, the jagged scar in his eyebrow finally relaxing. "No, to the place with the soul." The city didn't wake up the same the next morning. The old guard was erased from the map not by a massacre, but by a masterclass in controlled power. Radu's empire had folded like cheap paper, his enforcers either absorbed into Toby's high-end street network or vanished into the industrial minimalist silence of Kace's justice. At 3:14 a.m., exactly 1 month after the gasping bell first announced his arrival, Kace Vaduva pushed through the glass door of Jet's 24-hour diner. The neon sign was humming a steady, healthy blue. The rain was still falling, Bucharest style, relentless and cold, but inside, the air smelled like blueberry jam and expensive coffee. Kace didn't go to the corner booth. He didn't sit in the shadows like a ghost waiting to haunt a meal. He walked straight to the counter and sat on a swivel stool, his charcoal overcoat draped over his arm. Underneath, he wore a black turtleneck and a small gold chain, a gift from Sloane that sat hidden beneath his collar, a secret heart beneath the iron.
Toby Bencole was already there, leaning against the pie case. He looked disarming, his gap-toothed smile wider than ever, as he checked a new Patek Philippe on his wrist. "The harbor is open, Kace. Segun sent a crate of vintage scotch. He says the governor is invited to the wedding of his eldest son in Lagos next month." Kace allowed a rare, genuine smile to ghost across his lips. "Tell him we'll be there, but only if the catering is efficient." The kitchen door swung open with a practiced, efficient grace. Sloane Jett stepped out, her foulard
braids pulled back with a gold silk scarf that matched her nameplate necklace. She stopped when she saw Kace. Her almond-shaped eyes, usually skeptical and observant, were bright with a quiet triumph. She didn't bring him rye toast. She set a small white plate in front of him. On it sat 2 golden-brown pepinassi, dusted with powdered sugar and topped with a dollop of smetana and a deep purple crown of blueberry jam. "Safety," she whispered, leaning her elbows on the counter. "Took me 3 hours and 4 phone calls to a bakery in Constanza to get the cheese right. Eat it or I'm charging you triple for the labor." Kace picked up a fork, his silver signet ring catching the light of the diner's urban vintage lamps. He took a bite. For a second, the 52nd floor penthouse, the textile mill, and the street wars vanished. He was a boy again, safe, warm, and loved. "It's sufficient," Kace rasped, his slate-gray eyes locking onto hers. "Liar," Sloane teased. "It's perfect." Toby patted Kace on the shoulder, his broad-shouldered frame casting a protective shadow over the scene. "I'll leave you two to the government business. I have a shipment of sneakers to clear at the docks. Apparently, the heart of this operation wants the entire neighborhood in new kicks by Monday." As Toby walked out, the bell chiming a cheerful goodbye, the diner fell into a comfortable, shared stillness. It wasn't the silence of a predator anymore. It was the peace of a man who had finally found his home. Kace reached across the counter, his hand, the same hand that had broken Radu's jaw, gently taking Sloane's. He didn't track the exits. He didn't look for a target. "The streets are quiet, Sloane," Kace said. "But the people are talking. They say the Iron King has gone soft." Sloane squeezed his hand, her gold nose stud catching the neon glow. "Let them talk. A king who only knows how to hit things isn't a ruler. He's just a bully. A real leader knows when to listen to the governor." She leaned over the counter, her face inches from his, her tell-it-like-it-is energy pulling him in. "So, what's the first order of business for the new regime?" Kace looked at the papanassi, then at the woman who had saved his soul with $4.37 worth of empathy and a grease bin. "No more brooding. And the diner stays open 24 hours. I think I'm going to be spending a lot of time here." "Good," Sloane smiled, her observant gaze finally resting in a place of total trust. "Because you still haven't finished your toast." Outside, the rain continued to fall, but the iron of the city was no longer cold. It was forged into something new, something stronger, something that could only be governed by a heart.